I big girl cried. Because it was so sad. And I big girl cried. And it wasn't... Hey y'all, it's Ashley Bookistrom and I am back with another video. I am here to do a book talk on Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. I read this book for the Book Junkie Trials, where the challenge was for us to read a book that took part somewhat by the sea, or all of it took place in the sea. I don't know, something along those lines, because I can't remember exactly what the challenge is. I'm not gonna look it up. So Salt to the Sea is probably one of my favorite historical fiction books of all time. It is an emotional book, and Ruta Sepetys is very known for writing hard-hitting books. And she is also very well known for incorporating Lithuanian history into her books. So this is the portion of my book talk, like I always say, where I do a kind of non-spoilery overview of what the book is about before I kind of delve into the plot, the meat of the book, and what was so heartbreaking for me. So I'll let you know when that is up and when I jump into the spoilery part, just in case you don't want to know anything about the plot itself. So I did end up giving this book 5 out of 5 stars. This is the second time that I've actually read this book. I gave it 5 stars the first time I read it. I gave it 5 stars this time around, which is not always the case with me when I reread books. I have been known to lower my rating the second time I read a book around, either due to it being hyped up, different period in time of my life where I may have been younger, different perceptions, different life experiences. But this one has remained the same. And I feel like that says a lot about this book just in general. So this book is told in 4 alternating perspectives. You have Joanna, who is a nurse. You have Alfred, who is a part of the Nazi military. You have Emilia, who clearly, I don't want to say what is going on with her. She is a runaway of sorts. So I'm going to leave it at that. And then when I get into the spoilery section, I'll delve a little bit more into her character. And then you have Florian, who also is a runaway of sorts. So I won't say much about his character either, because I don't want to spoil it. Those two probably have the most mysterious backgrounds. The two of them have very, very mysterious backgrounds. But anyway, the 4 perspectives intertwine because they are all part of an evacuation plan to leave one part of Europe to get back towards Germany because of the Russian military advancement. And it is an extremely dangerous time. These, I don't want to say kids, they're not even teens, young adults. It's kind of a mixture of both. Well, teens, young adults, we kind of refer to them as the same thing. So I would say 15 up until maybe like 21. That's kind of your age range that you're dealing with. But they're all victims of war in their own way. There are perspectives in this book that I liked, perspectives of this book that I didn't like, and they all lead up to the maritime disaster. And I always have to look it up because I don't want to say the name of the ship wrong, and it is the Wilhelm Gustloff. And this is such an important aspect of history, and it's not a part of history that we often discuss, especially in maritime disasters. We talk a lot about like the Titanic, which lost, I think, close to 2,000 individuals. If I'm wrong on my numbers, y'all, please correct me. But the Wilhelm Gustloff lost close to 10,000 people. And for such a significant thing to have happened, and for people to have thought like, oh, this is going to be such a major part of history, this is something that they will talk about for ages, most people don't even know that it happened. A lot of people don't really know the significance of Lithuania in the time of World War II. So when we talk about World War II, a lot of times, and when we teach World War II, we talk about the major powers. So, you know, it's always focused around Germany, Russia, the United States, Japan, Italy, France, England. Those are the countries that we hear the most about. And clearly, with this world war, there were a lot more countries involved. and specifically Lithuania. There's a lot of history that's touched on in relation to East Prussia as well, and how these borders change as a result of the war. Even how Czechoslovakia after World War II, and you know, once communism sweeps through that part of Europe, Czechoslovakia has to fight to gain their independence. There's a lot of historical context in it, and she has done a lot of research to this book, which makes it phenomenal. She's sat down with people who have researched the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff. She's talked to individuals who were actually aboard the ship, or people who have had family members who were on board of the ship when it did go down. And just to give you a little bit of historical context before I delve into the plot, the Wilhelm Gustloff actually was supposed to, like I said, it was supposed to carry people back towards Germany for safety because of the Russian advancement. But what ended up happening is that there were Russian subs that ended up shooting 3 torpedoes. It's supposed to be 4, but one of them I think got jammed. And it was supposed to shoot all 4, only shot 3, and it shot those 3 into the ship, killing thousands of civilians, a lot of them, a great portion of them being children, which, being pregnant, I think just inflated how heartbreaking that was, that there were children trying to get to safety who never even got that chance. So it's a very powerful book. I always tell people that if they decide to read it, do know that it's heartbreaking. I mean, down from the very beginning, it's about war, and it's not romanticized. Nothing about this is romanticized. Ruta Sepetys doesn't give you a beautiful, wrapped up ending just because it is classified as a YA book. She gives you the truth and the reality of the situation. And, you know, war is never a pretty thing. I've never been a part or have seen war myself, but I know there are plenty of people who are my age and younger and older who have seen war, and it never turns out good for either side, especially civilians who are thrown into the mix of things, who don't really have a say in what's going on. It never turns out pretty. So keep that in mind. I do recommend it, even if you're not a historical fiction fan. Definitely give it a chance. It's such a phenomenal book and such a moving piece of literature. I think that this is something that I would be like, this should be required reading for schools, as opposed to some other stuff that I see. But this is so fantastic. This is something that definitely could be used in like a world history class of any sort, or if I mean, even if you're teaching U.S. history and you get to World War II, this is a part of World War II that is often not spoken about and should be spoken about frequently. As I said, I am now going to go into like the spoilery section of the book, where I talk a little bit more about characters, their backgrounds, how the book ends, why it broke me. So if you don't want to hear any of that, I would suggest clicking away now, because yeah, I'm going to spoil you. It's just the nature of a book talk. So like I said in the beginning of this focuses on 4 characters. You have Joanna, Amelia, Florian, and Alfred. Alfred is my least favorite character, and Alfred probably will be the least favorite character of a lot of people who read this book, because Alfred is part of it's part of like the German Navy, but his position is really weird, because what you'll see in his narrative is he writes, not even physically writing, but he mentally writes these letters to this girl by the name of Hannelore. I think that's how you say her name, Hannelore. And they're strange. You know from the get-go when he's writing them that they're very, very strange letters. And something about his personality isn't right. Something about who he thinks he is mentally is not who he is actually in reality. And he's a cruel and disgusting individual when it's all said and done. And you learn that over time. And it's amazing how he has succumbed. And I think it's an interesting perspective too, because it gives you the perspective as someone who is part of the Nazi military, who's a big supporter and advocate for Hitler and his ideologies. And you can see in his narrative how the ideologies of Nazis just don't make sense. Like it's just not, it's not logical. But then you have to recognize the fascination in how Hitler was able to move these people into believing things like this. And I know I was in a seminar once, and someone said, you know, start naming great leaders. You know, people always say stuff like Martin Luther King, FDR, Church, like, you know, the people who are quote unquote on the good side of history. But, and some people may disagree with me, but I really think if you look at the context of it, not saying that he was a good person, Hitler was a damn good leader. And that's something that historically I think we can't deny. He is a phenomenal leader. Crazy, disgusting ideologies. But you can see in Alfred's character how Hitler was able to sway people into believing the most atrocious and disgusting things about humans that just didn't make any sense. And Alfred is a perfect example of how twisted it is, because Alfred is super in love with Hannelore. You can tell just in the way that he thinks about her, he talks about her, and how they had this which I think was all just made up, but he felt like they had this connection, that they were meant to be, that they were great friends, and you know, that they would eventually be romantic interests, and that, you know, he was super in love with her. And comes to find out at the end, Hannelore is Jewish, and he tries to save her by saying she's only half. She's not, you know, don't take her, don't blame her. Her mother married a Jew, it's not her fault. And Hannelore turns to him and says, I am Jewish. And to know that he fell in love with someone who was Jewish, and he didn't want to push them to identify as Jewish because he was so in love. It makes you see, like, you know, you like this person, you love this person because of who they are. Their only issue is that you've been taught this ideology that all Jewish people are bad. So in that sense, it makes you see how far Hitler's reach was, and how, without even having direct contact with people, he was able to influence these ideologies that being a part of a certain religious or ethnic group made you a shitty person. It made you less than. It made you unequal to the Aryan race, blonde hair, blue eyed. And for that, you know, it's conflicting with Alfred, because you think that Alfred is he's a disgusting individual, but then at the same time, it's like, he was young, and, you know, you have to think about all the children who were part of the Hitler Youth, and how they were, kids are young, your brain doesn't fully develop, I think, until your mid-20s, and to convince children, and plenty of studies of this, to hate groups is so detrimental and so easy to do. And it makes you question, do we really blame these individuals who've been taught this because they know no better? Because Alfred grew up in a household where he was pushed, you know, you need to be a part of the Hitler Youth, you need to accept these ideologies, and he's young. Even when he gets to certain parts in his book, like, he's a young man, and his character is so twisted. He's such a twisted individual, but he plays such an interesting role in all this, and he looks up to wanting to be a part of something. And I think that Rita Sepetys also does a wonderful job in establishing the idea that wanting to belong is the easiest way to get people to be a part of something that is not necessarily positive. Or the need to belong, the need to have family. And a lot of that has been studied in, like, gang relations. Why do people join gangs? It's the need to belong, the need to have family, the need to feel accepted. And Alfred, definitely, you can see the dynamic of his relationship change when he meets Joanna and when he meets Florian, because he learns that Florian is on supposedly this secret mission for an SS member. What's his name? I don't know how to say it. It's Koch. And historically, I mean, this is an actual historical man, like horrible man. And the only reason why they didn't kill him after the war is because he was already sick, but he died in a Polish prison, I think in his 80s or 90s, one of the two. And when he finds out that Florian is attached to this high-ranking SS officer, you know, he feels like, oh, if I befriend him, you know, like, I'll be accepted. And when he sees Joanna, it's like, you know, well, Joanna is the perfect representation of the Aryan race, and this is who I should be around, this is who I should accept, and I want her to like me, I want her to have feelings for me, I want a woman to like me. It's sad and it's disgusting at the same time. So for me, I was very torn about Alfred. I mean, I don't like him, but there's a lot more character development and a lot more character study that goes behind him. As far as the other three characters, you have Joanna, who is a nurse who has a dark history. She is, her family actually did this process where, I don't remember the exact terminology for it, and I don't think I'm going to be able to find it for the sake of this review. But her family was basically able to kind of, I don't want to say ask for forgiveness from Hitler, but they were close enough to some German bloodlines that Hitler forgave them for being from a country that he considered lesser than. And I can't remember what the actual terms were for, but she has a dark history. She's very strong, a very, very strong character, but also she has a lot of burdens with her family, because she hasn't seen her family. And I think it was something along the lines of her family had to evacuate, and she was told not to tell anyone, not to say anything, and she left a letter to her cousin. And because when the Russians came to kill her family, they couldn't find them, but the cook, I believe, gave the letter because she was scared for her own life. She gave the letter to the Russians, and the Russians went and killed her cousin and her entire family. So she's carrying around that guilt, and she's saving people. You know, she goes on to be a nurse, and she's saving people as she finds them throughout the war because of the fact that she's carrying around this guilt. So she's trying to save as many lives as she can to make up for the lives that she feels like she cost, even if it was just pure accident. She just wanted to tell her cousin, you know, basically, bye, I love you, I care for you, and it ended up costing her cousin her life. So she's dealing with that. You have Florian has a lot of issues because he is an artist, but he's an artist in a different sense. He doesn't create work, he's all about recreating. So Florian is the type of individual that will actually duplicate a work before he will create his own work. And he goes to work for, and I'm going to need to find that name because the guy it's also another guy who is actually a part of history, and he is very well known. Dr. Lang. Actually, I don't know if Dr. Lang is actually a real person. I know that Koch is a real person. But Florian apparently worked for Dr. Lang, who worked in a museum in Königsberg, which also is a big part of the history behind this. That is talked about, but I don't know how much people know about it. That Germany was stealing art from different countries. And of course, Hitler was an artist himself. He applied to go to art school, got denied, but he was an artist. and they would steal art from countries or cities or towns that they pillaged through and would keep the art for themselves. So Dr. Lang was a part of that process. And what Florian didn't know is that that was what was happening. He thought that Dr. Lang was just this great curator who dealt a lot with restoration, and he would write him letters and tell him how much he admired him. And then Florian ended up working under him, and his father had warned him, like, hey, don't do that, like, this guy is not what you think he is. And Florian didn't want to listen to him. And then he learned the hard way that Dr. Lang had this whole plan with Coach, and that in him working for Dr. Lang, it was a setup, because if Coach and Dr. Lang ever got caught or they ever got in trouble or something went bad, then they could blame everything on Florian, and Florian ended up being their scapegoat for everything. But there is a specific aspect that I'm going to look for it. Basically, the specific aspect that I was making a reference to is that Florian has access to what is known as the Amber Room. The Amber Room was once considered the 8th wonder of the world, and is one of the most, I guess it's the biggest mystery of World War II, because it just disappeared. And its pieces of the room were pillaged and they were never found. And apparently Florian has the key to the room where it lied, and he has stolen the key, and now he's on the run. So that's kind of like his big mystery and what he's hiding from. And he knows that if he gets caught with that key, the map to the room, and also a prize, I think it's a dove or a swan that he's taken out the room as well, he'll get killed. So he basically is running for his life, but he's also doing this to piss off Hitler, Dr. Lang, and Coach at the same time. And the last individual that we have is Amelia, and Amelia is Polish, and when it opens up, she's raped by a Russian, which I did not know was such a huge issue. Like, the Russians raped, and I'm sure it happens a lot in war, but this was kind of something that was talked about a lot in this book, was how the Russians would rape and pillage women whenever they went to different towns. And it was heartbreaking that it opened up with her getting raped, and that's how she meets Florian, and he saves her by killing the Russian. And it all comes about that at the end, Amelia is pregnant, and she builds this narrative that she thinks she gets pregnant by this guy who she gets sent to work with on the farm. But what ends up happening is the Russians come to the farm, and the woman who she's staying with, they ask for her daughter first, and the woman's like, no, she has issues, she's diseased. But then she looks at Amelia and she says, you guys can have her. And at that point, she gives Amelia up to save her own daughter, and Amelia is raped and becomes pregnant. And it's so heartbreaking, and she's so disappointed. When she has her baby, she doesn't want to have anything to do with her because her baby is a product of rape. But, Florian and her build this kind of brother and sister-like relationship. And he's able to convince her, like, this is your child. Don't worry about who the father is. This child is you, it's your mother, it's your father. This child is Poland, and this child deserves to be saved. The three of them end up pretty much, Florian, Amelia, and Joanna end up linking up. And Joanna's already with a tribe of people. There's an old shoemaker, a really tall woman, and a little boy that's a wanderer. And they all travel together to make it to the ship. I mean, it's just ups and downs with traveling in the snow, avoiding people, finding people who have killed themselves to avoid being captured by the Russians. It's super, super sad. But it does happen, and it's amazing that people would rather kill themselves than be taken by the Russians. So they get to the port, and they have so many things that they have to do in order to kind of sneak each other on board. Thankfully Joanna was there, because Joanna is needed on the ship because she is a nurse. But she was able to get the shoemaker and the little boy and Amelia on board as kind of her patients. And Florian ends up getting on board because he creates his own pass, and he uses Alfred as a way to get what he wants. And there are a few things that happen on the ship that are not super significant. There is a romance that does develop between Joanna and Florian, but it's not something that it's not a main focus, and it's done so tastefully. It doesn't surprise you that they do fall in love, but gosh, it gets so crazy by the time that the torpedoes hit the ship. Everything just goes to hell. And what ends up happening is that everybody tries to get out, but there's only 10, I think, lifeboats. 10 additional lifeboats on the boat, on the ship. There's 10,000 people. You can do the math. It's not going to work out. People, of course, panic. You know, when people panic, they're not willing to share. They're worried about self. By the time people get in the water, they instantaneously, their body goes into shock and they die. A lot of children end up dying. This shoemaker attempts to, you know, I think Joanna and Florian end up on a boat together with a little boy. Amelia, this is the part that like broke my heart. Amelia was, she gave her daughter to Florian and she stayed on the boat. So she ends up inevitably sacrificing her life just so her daughter can live. And it's super sad. And the shoemaker tries to reunite with a little boy who's come to be like his grandson. He ends up dying. And Alfred, you know, he ends up dying because he doesn't make it. He just goes delirious at the end and accidentally kills himself. And what I do love is that towards the end, each one of these characters goes through something that will just Florian, Amelia, and Joanna, who talk about fate and guilt and different things, and it applies to what they've been through. So Florian's is fate as a hunter. It's barrel pressed against my forehead, which is because he was running from the Nazis and trying to piss off Hitler. Joanna's was guilt is a hunter. I was his hostage. She felt guilty because she wrote a letter that got her family killed. And Amelia's is shame is a hunter. My shame was all around me now. And she's shameful because she was raped and ended up pregnant and having a child that was born of rape. And super hard to hear any of that, y'all. It's super difficult. I guess I just didn't realize how important this book was in a lot of ways. How it was important historically, just different events that happened. If you see it, like the pink tabs, I don't know if it's gonna focus or not. There we go. So the pink tabs in this book are tabs that I actually made note of historical events that I actually did background research on. And one of the interesting things was just how polarizing Germany and Russia were. And for Amelia, it was very hard being Polish, because even in one of her parts, she says that, see if I can find it, yeah, right here. She says, on September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland from the west. On September 17th, 1939, Russia invaded Poland from the east. And it makes you realize how much people in Poland suffered because of two countries that they were stuck in between, and how they were disliked by both countries. And it's sad. And how much Lithuania, was changed as a result. And Joanna came from Lithuania, and then East Prussia completely disappears once the war is over with. And that was Florian's home. So all three of them come from areas that if there's a map in the beginning of the book and there's a map at the end of the book that shows you how the geographic lines with each territory have changed, where East Prussia becomes a territory of Russia, and it's cut, and Poland absorbs some of that territory. Poland's borders change. Czechoslovakia becomes the Czech Republic and Slovakia, and how part of Poland becomes the Ukraine and Belarus. It's so crazy. It's so crazy that war can do things like that. And I won't talk, because this video has been super, super long, just because this book is just so powerful to me and it means so much. But the last thing that I wanted to point out, just the significance of the Wilhelm Gustloff, and how it is the deadliest disaster in maritime history, and it has losses that basically dwarf the death tolls of both the Titanic and the Lusitania. And the 4 torpedoes that hit it on January 30th, 1945, on those missiles were written for the motherland, for the Soviet people, for Leningrad, for Stalin. And what ended up happening is that Ruta Sepetys goes on in her author's note to tell you actually how many people ended up dying. So there were, so the Wilhelm Gustloff lost a whole bunch of people. Then there was the SS General von Steuben, which lost 4,000. The MV Goya lost 6,500. And ships like Thielbeck and Cap Arcana were carrying Jewish prisoners from concentration camps. And those ships were bombed and sunk by British RFA planes, and they killed over 7,000 people. So it's estimated that in the year 1945 alone, over 25,000 people lost their lives in the Baltic Sea. And that's something that is not actively discussed, and it's very hard hitting. It's very hard hitting. So like I said, y'all, I really enjoyed this book. One of my favorites. I'm trying not to get emotional as I talk about it because it is such an emotional book. But definitely check it out. If you haven't read it, this is something that you definitely need to read. As always, if you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button, the bell for notification. I will leave all of my links and my social media down below in the description box. And I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, and I'll be back with another review soon. Bye.